Good morning. Today, we want to talk about trial balance. When we talk about trial balance, we're talking about a draw placed from all our ledgers. So a trial balance is a list balances taken from the ledger account at a set point in time. So as soon as our ledger is done, whatever the transactions are in terms of the debit entry, the credit entries, in terms of liabilities, in terms of assets, in terms of expenses, in terms of revenue, all these things have to go to the trial balance, and our trial balance must balance. But in case our trial balance doesn't balance, then we need to open a suspense account, which becomes a temporary account until we are able to locate the errors. So that's about trial balance here. So what are the purpose of having a trial balance? So the primary purpose of preparing a trial balance is to check the arithmetical accuracy of the ledger account. So it means that we need to be sure that all our calculations, all what we have to add, we have added, all what we are supposed to subtract, we have subtracted. So the trial balance will allow us to know if we have done the right thing or not, because it has to balance. So if it doesn't balance, it means we have made some mistakes. So the steps towards opening the trial balance. So the steps towards opening the trial balance starts from the source document, from transaction. When we talk about the transaction, business is about exchange of goods and services for money. So as soon as the transaction is done, there's going to be what we call a source document, which is a business document representing the kind of transaction we've carried out, between the kind of transaction that has existed between the supplier and the buyer. So this source document, as soon as we have this source document, which should be an invoice, a receipt, a credit note, a debit note, and whatever it is, all these are business documents which represent different transactions at any point in time. As soon as these documents are intact, then we have to use it to open each double entry account, which is the books of prime entry. Therefore, the books of prime entry, we're talking about a journal. So the source document, especially for the invoice, we use it to record into the journal. We have the sales journal, we have the purchases journal, we have the sales returns journal, we have the purchases returns journal. As soon as the journals are done, then we open each individual account for each customer, that's credit customers, and for each suppliers, that's credit suppliers on the ledger. So the list, the summary of all the ledger opened will go into the trial balance. And as soon as the trial balance is done, we use our trial balance to prepare our financial statement, which means we use our trial balance to prepare the profit or the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income, and the statement of financial position, which is financial statement. So we have a trial balance here. We have the debit side, examples of things in the debit side. So when preparing the trial balance, we always have a debit side and the credit side. So what are those things that we put on the credit side of our trial balance, and what are those things we put on the debit side of our trial balance? So we have one here. Assets are always on the debit side because they represent an increase to the asset, to what resources of the business. Expenses is always on the debit side. Drawings is always on the debit side, which means we're talking about withdrawals by personal use, by donors of the business. Purchases is always on the debit side. Liability is always on the credit side of the trial balance. Other income like profit is always on the credit side of the trial balance. Capital is also on the credit side of the trial balance. And revenue is also on the credit side of our trial balance. So what are the limitations? We said if all accounts balances are correct, but the trial balance does not balance, then the suspense account needs to be added to the list of balances in order to balance the trial balance. So if the trial balance doesn't balance, what you need to do is to open the suspense account. The suspense account will allow us to have certain amounts, which we later find out in the debit or the credit side of our trial balance, to make our trial balance, to make our entries balance. So we'll go to limitations on the trial balance. So first limitation is that the trial balance simply checks the arithmetic accuracy of the double entry system. However, if the trial balance totals match, it does not mean that the ledgers are free from mistakes. So your trial balance might balance, but it does not mean that the entries on your ledger are free from mistakes or errors, because there are some errors in the trial balance, errors that would not affect the trial balance, like error of commission, principal, error of principal, double reversal of entry, original entry, or compensating errors. All these errors will still not affect our trial balance because they don't represent arithmetic accuracy. So it's about posting, and whatever happens at the end of it, our trial balance will balance. So those are the errors that does not affect trial balance. So these errors, when they happen, they might still affect our trial balance. We're going to talk further on these errors as we go on to the next page. So we have a question in activity 1, which I am going to just explain which one is supposed to be on which side. And then we try to do the balancing. So they said, case study Siwa. The following balances were extracted from Siwa's books at 31 December 2018. So I'm just going to be stating each account and where they are supposed to be placed in the trial balance. Motor vehicle at cost is a debit entry because an asset, it represents an asset. Fixtures and fitting at cost is a debit entry, it represents an asset, it's a debit. Property at cost is a debit. Loan is a liability which represents a credit. Advertising is an expenses, it represents a debit entry. Administration expenses is a debit entry. Loan, interest on loan is an expense, so it will be on the debit side of the trial balance. Bank overdraft is a current liability which represents a credit entry. It's going to be on the credit side of our trial balance. Trade receivables is a debit entry because it represents the numbers of debtors we have, or yes, a number of debtors we have, which is an asset for the business. We call it current asset. Trade payables represents our supplier, our credit suppliers, which is a credit entry. Profit is an income for the business, so it's going to be on the credit side of the trial balance because an income. Allowance provision for irrecoverable debts. Provision for irrecoverable debts is a credit entry, so it's a credit entry. Siwa's capital account. Capital is a credit entry. Revenue represents a credit entry. Purchases represents a debit entry. Opening inventory is a debit entry because it was a closing entry for the last year, now opening entry. But whenever we have a closing inventory, the closing inventory will be a credit entry. All opening inventory will be a debit entry. All closing inventory will be a credit entry. Depreciation of motor vehicle. So for depreciation is a debit. It's debit in nature as it is considered as an expense. But whenever we have accumulated depreciation, for accumulated depreciation, we don't have yet, but I'm just stating that whenever we have accumulated depreciation, it is a credit. It is credit in nature because it is initially recorded when depreciation account is recorded as an expense. So when we have provision for depreciation or accumulated depreciation, they represent a credit entry in our trial balance. But when it is just depreciation, which is an expense, it is a debit entry in our trial balance. The depreciation of fixtures and fittings, it's also an expense, so it's a debit entry. So that's how our trial balance would balance. So we have all these calculations. So let me just try to see if we can balance them up and see if the trial balance would balance. Just going to use the calculator here. So our total debit, I'm just going to try to do it out. Total debit and total credit. For our debit side, we're going to have 5,600 plus 4,200 plus 5,600 plus advertising on loan 280 plus administrative expenses 1316 plus interest on loan 56 plus trade receivable 3150 plus trade plus purchases 5180 plus opening inventory 3,500 plus 1680 plus 840. So our total on the debit side is 31,402. Let's check the credit side. Our credit side, we have loan, which is 1680 plus trade payables 2086 plus profit 5250 plus allowance 210 plus capital 5446 plus revenue 10850. So I think we have 2552 here. Let's see, do we have any other information? Prepare to balance receipt. So we're having a different figure here. So we check the final figure here. We have on the credit side, we have 25,522. So 25,522 minus 31,402. So we have a difference of 5,880. So that's the difference on the credit side. So we take this to our suspense account. Thank you. So this is how we prepare it to our balance. Thank you.